We believe in this concept of smart, lean BIM. Who should do what BIM, for what reasons, at what time, and really understand that well in advance. And today what we're going to cover is something we've been so excited to talk about, and that's this visual BIM scoping. That's really been our focus, and making this much easier, much more accessible, and much more straightforward and clear so that people can really understand it. We are the same as many other industries. We require planning tools, authoring tools, analysis, and use. And in our industry, we have some fantastic authoring, analysis, and use tools. What people said to us was that the challenges that they were experiencing were that they were using planning tools that were not dedicated for our industry, and that they were not connected in themselves, and then also not connected to the rest of the ecosystem. And so what we've done is a couple of things. The first one was combine them into a web-based open API, very standardized way of planning, but a very flexible way of approaching it and collaborative approach. And then we're looking to be able to break through that barrier and remove that so that we can have a connection with the rest of the workflow. Really, really powerful for our users to get that and to start validating that workflow. And that workflow is a 3 integrated step process. We have the planning, we have the scoping, and then we have the flow to manage those in a very simple workflow. We've had webinars before with the planning side of things, but the BIM Execution Plan, whether it starts with an employer's information requirements or it's your BIM Execution Plan response and tying those together, your project implementation plan, everything can be planned from introduction through to the deliverables and contract terms, shared, approved, live, and archived. We will not go into that. There's more webinars on that. What we will do today is the scoping, and it's the simple, visual, lean, and really collaborative scope that we're excited about sharing. And we will go into much more detail there. The flow, as we mentioned, is about planning and managing, tracking, and controlling those activities from the scope that people have agreed to. And we will also have webinars there. And then the expectation as well is that maybe not everyone has a web browser and we want to create a PDF. So we can export those and rapidly share those in a very visual way as well. So today we're going to focus on the scope. Let's get into the software. Let's go into the plan just quickly to show you on this project. We've set something up. As Louis said, we've seen this in previous webinars, so we're not going to go through this, but being able to understand what the requirements are for file naming, have a signature, have an introduction, have video-based information, and also have things like the project information, the location, and the team. So really important to see the team members, and you'll see how this comes into effect later on in the demonstration. So we're going to move on to the scope. Every project is different. You might have different milestones. We here have just defined a few. So these are your stages, your phases, your data drops, your BIM uses. Could be deliverable based. You can edit them, you can add dates to those.
Yeah, and they're flexible enough, and so someone might follow the REBA stages or
Right.
AIA stages.
Yep. So that didn't sound choreographed at all. Here in the templates, we can add those. So if you're following REBA, you could simply just add those very quick. Where do you think we might start? So there's a big button in the middle that says add scope. There are a few different ways we could add scope. We could add it from scopes that we've created before. We could add it from projects that we're associated with that we have access to, or we could add it from community shared, a global scope. So if you have created something and you've shared it, you can access that here. We're going to create a new scope. And so that new scope is completely fresh, and we're going to let's call it an example scope. We'll give it a type, and we'll call it it's a design type of scope, and we are going to, let's put some kind of piping or something like that. So we search and we can see this is a system, so domestic water with some piping, and let's put maybe the ventilation, let's put the fire in here as well. So we've picked 2 systems, and they are added as lines in our scope. Where might we go next? As we start to fill in this scope, you can see that the images are added for us. So it's starting to become a nice visual representation. At coordination stage, we might be requiring a 350. So you can see that here we're following the BIM forum standard. and then construction documentation at 400 for fabrication level.
You just mentioned the standard. So someone might be asking about the UK standards. You can easily change that within the account settings. And there's a few other options as well.
Right. Yeah. So the account settings, you could choose the LOD numbers for the UK being, LOD 2, 3, 4, etc. One of the things that we realized as we traveled around the world was there was this confusion over what it was, but also the pain that everything was too fixed and not flexible enough. And we heard you loud and clear. Hundreds of people around the world said each project has different BIM requirements, different BIM goals, and we wanted to be able to define what those requirements were at each individual element level. For example, at the budget stage, maybe we just want to have a count of those tanks, and we just want to have some kind of symbolic representation for that. Maybe we do want to start adding the tanks, and we obviously want them for coordination and for the construction, so we can start to add them here. The domestic water equipment, so maybe, yes, we do want it for these items. And you can see up the top, these images are being updated. Maybe it's schematic design, we don't need the clearances, but for coordination, we do. And for construction, maybe we do. So we can start to add the zones in, maybe for coordination, and we can start to add in, let's add in more of the risers, and you can kind of see the picture building up. We can open the modal. I'll just add a few of these. I'll add the plumbing fixtures in here as well.
So this goes back to one of our poll questions, whether you run into too much scope, very little. In this part of the app could help you define the exact scope that's needed at the right time.
The handover, if somebody would like an as-built model, again, this has been a challenge because the scale sort of indicates that this would be an increase in the amount of potentially geometry detail, everything. But really what we're saying is at 500, maybe the owner only wants to have the tanks and the equipment from a maintenance perspective. But maybe they do want to have the maturity at an as-built level. We've teamed up with the level of accuracy team, and now we are able to define a measured or represented accuracy for that set of elements for that owner and for that requirement. So very quickly we can define what an as-built is and what that means for this owner. Clearly, you can see here an inverted bell curve showing what is important at each phase, and maybe there are fewer elements that would be important, but maybe they need to be an accurate as-built for the handover at that point in time.
Yeah, we've seen many companies take this approach to the owners and either have them gain access to the project so that they can fill in their own information, or we've also seen them just meet and go through this, system by system or element by element if needed, and really narrow in on the exact information that was needed for that project.
Right. So you say information. Yeah, we've talked about geometry and accuracy of as-built, etc. But what about information? So for the handover, we would be able to come in and we'd say, okay, let's add information. There are different scales, LOI scales, but we have also heard that can be very waste processed by over specifying. So we have a targeted way of specifying here by saying the owner would like a barcode, for example, but maybe they would like maintenance requirements. So maybe the maintenance level and the duration between the preventative maintenance tasks and what those tasks are. And then we can add those specific 4 requirements to whichever elements we want at whatever stage. So here we're going to add those requirements to those 2, the tanks and the equipment, because that's what the owner has asked us for. We can sit down in a meeting very quickly and assign that. And then you can see this flag showing those requirements for that. So really, really powerful, targeted level of information, and also the level of detail and that combination of development of the model. How mature, which elements, who is responsible, we'll come to that as well. If you're collaborating with other teams, maybe you might want to bring in other people's scopes. Let's just quickly turn off that level. Actually, let me just rapidly fill in a couple of these so that you can kind of get the idea of what we might be doing with other systems. If we are working with other team members, maybe we're working with another trade or we're working with the owner and they have their own use of LOD Planner, we can bring in their scopes as well. If we've had a project that has been shared with us, we can then bring that up, and we've got a couple in this example where there are some owner requirements and maybe some of the services requirements for some of the mechanical systems.
So what Clive is doing is bringing in those scopes that from other projects that other teams may have created. More importantly is the reuse of information. So if you've created yourself these scopes, you can go back to past projects or go back from a template that you've created and bring that information and continuously improve on those templates just by going into the template and always updating it as you go.
That's a great point. And so here you can see the example scope that we created. We're not needing any updates to this scope because this is the master scope, but the mechanical and the owner's scope, the owner might update their own scope in their system, and you can then replace. So I'd be able to click this to be able to update our scope from theirs. So same thing happening in the BIM Execution Plan sections as they are in here in these scopes. So you can really take a powerful leap and have that combined and continuously improve the process. You can see here, this is the owner scope, and these are the items that they are interested in, and they've got the information requirements associated with them. So we've populated that very quickly with all of those from the different teams.
So who's responsible?
That's a great question. Now let's add some teams. In our plan, we've defined some teams, and we can then quickly go through and start to assign some of those. Maybe the architect, please don't hold me to some of these. I'm just going to quickly assign some of these, and just so that we've got some assignments. And then maybe we've got a BIM manager that is responsible for some of these items.
That's a good example to show the model handover. So maybe at an early budget estimate or schematic phase, just an example, an architect's kind of designing where these fixtures might be placed in the counts, but at the once an engineer shows up or gets added to that project, you can see that transition happening and that responsibility also transition.
Right. So yeah, I'm just going to assign a few of these. So you actually it's really quite fun, this part. So in addition to the numbers, we also have this option to show text, which has been really, really powerful for people to understand. Now, there's no need to then translate that number from something that's kind of abstract into something that actually means something. Now people can come in and read this and actually see, oh, I understand it. I get exactly what you're talking about. But we love the images. What about anybody that doesn't have access to a web browser? And we say that jokingly, tongue in cheek, but we do know that you still have to create contracts and documents from this. So we have a PDF option because we've been developing the EIR and back to back with the BIM Execution Plan. We already have these documents that have been archived, but we're going to create another one for the scope. Add the scope. And then let's choose the summary and also the details for the scope and hit save. This is going to create us a document, a PDF file that will also be archived. And if we want to distribute the document or download the document for somebody else, it's very easy for us to then do that. Now, if we open this document and we can see that there is a summary of that table, and then we can see all of the elements that have requirements at certain points in time. And then if we go all the way to the bottom of this, you can see these are the owner's requirements. So you can see the space for the cooling systems. They only wanted generic geometry, but they wanted this detail from the operations and maintenance and warranty details, etc. So really powerful output for being able to follow our traditional management and contracting process as well. I also hear people asking as well how you would then manage this. How do we get this done? Usually the BIM Execution Plan and the LOD matrix get forgotten. We've heard that a lot.
In a drawer somewhere.
In a drawer. But what we've been able to do in that scoping process is create, and let's filter for a milestone, for example, the coordination milestone. We've been able to create our set of tasks that we can then manage and control throughout the project. And instead of it being a new process or a very disconnected process, we can quickly get these tasks We also have the ability to print the cards for any pull planning and design management workflow. And this will actually be covered in a lot more detail in a subsequent webinar, but just to kind of give you an idea of how quick that is to create these and have them as an output. And then we are able to then drag and drop these around. So instead of a mundane process to update these and assign them, etc., and we go into this in more detail in another webinar, this is a drag and drop to update progress. Planning of BIM execution plans, scopes, and the flow of those tasks is what we cover as a whole workflow, an integrated workflow, really simple to help people to understand what's required. Today we covered that visual scoping. It's comments like somebody said that we have the iPhone for BIM, and that puts a smile on our faces. It's when you help us to help others discover what we're doing, that's really, really useful as well. So if you please have something to share with others in your team or in the social media side of things, that would be really good. That would support the work that we're doing. Thank you so much for your time, and we will look forward to the next webinar. You'll be able to register tomorrow.